Now sit with that number, because the vaults of the Shanghai Futures Exchange SHFE, which serves all of China, currently hold roughly 14.4 million ounces. So one private individual now holds more physical silver than China's main futures exchange. That's not normal. That's not noise. That's a signal. If you're new here, nice to meet you. My name is Ken AG. We don't chase hype here. We watch real moves, especially the ones that never show up in the mainstream media. If you value this kind of analysis, subscribe and turn on notifications. It allows me to keep bringing you this content with calm, depth, and independence. Before we continue, the quick and necessary disclaimer. This content is educational only. It is not investment advice. Do your own research. Now, let's get into what matters. Why is this purchase different? David Bateman didn't buy paper. He didn't buy an ETF. He didn't buy a promise. He bought physical metal. And this isn't the first time. Over the past few months, he has already allocated nearly $1 billion into precious metals. In silver alone, he reportedly bought around 1.5% of total annual global production. Let me put that in perspective, because when you hear 1.5%, it might not sound like much. But think about what that means. Global silver mine production is approximately 835 million ounces per year. 1.5% of that is roughly 12.5 million ounces. One person acquiring over a year's worth of what would be 1.5% of global production. That's enormous. To give you another comparison, the entire COMEx registered silver inventory, the metal available for delivery in New York, sits around 26 million ounces. Bateman alone holds more than half of that. He holds more than the entire deliverable inventory of the world's largest silver futures exchange. Think about what that means for supply dynamics. Think about what happens if more people, more institutions, more sovereigns decide to do what he's doing. Let me give you more comparisons to really drive this home. The largest silver ETF in the world, SLV, holds approximately 550 million ounces. So, Bateman personally owns nearly 3% of what the largest silver ETF holds. But here's the critical difference. SLV shares can be created and redeemed. Authorized participants can deliver silver to create shares, or redeem shares to receive silver. The metal flows in and out based on demand. Bateman's metal doesn't flow. It's locked up. It's strategic. It's off the market. When you take physical delivery and store it privately, you remove supply from the system. That metal can't be lent out. It can't be rehypothecated. It can't be used to satisfy delivery obligations. It's gone from the available supply pool. Now think about sovereign holdings. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve holds crude oil, but there's no official U.S. silver reserve. Most countries don't hold silver reserves anymore. They hold gold, they hold foreign currency reserves, they hold bonds. But silver was demonetized decades ago. So you have a private individual holding more silver than most countries, more than entire exchanges, more than most mining companies even produce in a year. Let's talk about mining companies. The largest primary silver miner in the world produces roughly 20 million ounces per year. So Bateman holds about 9 months' worth of production from the world's biggest silver miner. If that miner wanted to accumulate that much silver, they'd have to not sell their production for 9 months. Think about the logistics, the capital, the storage, the security. Bateman has done all of that. He's built a position that rivals what major miners produce annually. That's not a hedge. That's strategic positioning, and here's the most interesting detail. He structured the purchase so that if mining stocks and silver peak together, he captures roughly an additional 20% in the operation. It lowers taxes and it increases the number of ounces. Final result, 14.8 million ounces. Let me explain this structure because it's sophisticated. When you buy physical silver directly, you pay capital gains tax when you sell. But if you structure the purchase through mining stocks or certain derivative instruments that deliver into physical, you can defer taxes, reduce effective tax rates, or even increase your ultimate ounce count through the mechanics of the structure. I don't know the exact details of Bateman's setup, but the fact that he's getting an extra 20% in efficiency tells you he's working with top-level tax and commodity advisors. This isn't retail buying. This is institutional-level execution. Bateman isn't trying to win a price move. He's building an irreversible position. What does that mean? It means he's not planning to flip this. He's not trading. He's accumulating for a structural shift. He believes the monetary system is at an inflection point, and he's positioning for the other side of that inflection. Now, I'm going to be transparent with you. I believe in the same thesis, not because he's a whale, but because the facts point in the same direction. Let's talk pillars. First pillar. The global monetary system is at the end of a cycle. Call it the Great Reset, the endgame of Basel-era banking, or simply mathematical exhaustion. The current system, the one built after Bretton Woods collapsed in 1971, is based on fiat currencies backed by nothing except confidence and military power. That system has now run for over 50 years, and in those 50 years, global debt has exploded. Currencies have been debased. Real wages have stagnated. Asset prices have inflated massively. And the gap between financial wealth and real productive capacity has never been wider. We're at the point where central banks have to choose between letting the system collapse or printing unlimited amounts of currency. And they will always choose to print. That's the path of least resistance, politically. Second pillar, the biggest credit bubble in history, is approaching its breaking point. We're talking about something on the order of $300 trillion in debts, derivatives, and promises. Let me break that down. Global GDP is roughly $95 trillion. So we have debt and financial claims that are more than 3 times the entire productive output of the planet. That's not sustainable. At some point, those claims have to be reconciled with reality. And when that happens, not all promises can be kept. Think about what 300 trillion means. If you tried to pay that back at $1 per second, it would take over 9 million years. That's how disconnected the financial system has become from the real economy. Most of that 300 trillion is derivatives, contracts that reference other contracts, bets on bets on bets, and the entire structure is held together by confidence. As long as everyone believes the counterparties can pay, the system functions. But if confidence breaks, if people start questioning whether the promises can be kept, the cascade is unstoppable. Third pillar, the U.S. has roughly $28 trillion in treasuries maturing over the coming years. There isn't enough natural demand to absorb that. Think about what happens when a treasury matures. The government has to pay back the bondholder. Where does the money come from? Either from tax revenue, which is already running massive deficits, or from issuing new bonds. So you're rolling over old debt with new debt. That works as long as there are buyers for the new bonds. But who's buying? Foreign central banks used to be the marginal buyer. China, Japan, others would recycle their trade surpluses into treasuries. But over the last few years, they've been selling, not buying. China's treasury holdings have declined. Japan is facing its own debt crisis. So who's left? The Federal Reserve. The Fed becomes the buyer of last resort. They print dollars and buy treasuries. That's monetizing the debt. That's the definition of currency debasement. The only exit is printing, monetary inflation. And in that environment, financial assets become chairs in a game of musical chairs. When the music stops, whoever's holding a promise is left standing. This is the core of Bateman's thesis. And it's why he's buying physical metal, not financial claims. Why silver and gold? Gold and silver aren't investments. They're lifeboats. They have no counterparty risk. You don't depend on a bank, on a government, on a company to honor a promise. The metal is the asset. It can't be deleted. It doesn't break. It doesn't promise. It delivers. If you hold a gold coin, you own gold. If you hold a silver bar, you own silver. There's no intermediary. There's no contract. There's no trust required. Compare that to every other asset. Stocks? You're trusting the company to perform, the auditors to be honest, the regulators to enforce rules. Bonds? You're trusting the issuer to pay, the currency to hold value, the legal system to enforce claims. Real estate? You're trusting property rights, tax authorities, local governments. Crypto? You're trusting code, exchanges, your ability to secure keys, the network to function. Every asset except physical precious metals requires trust in a system. Silver especially has something unique. It's monetary and industrial. Gold is primarily monetary. It's a store of value, a medium of exchange historically, a reserve asset. But it has limited industrial use. Silver is different. Silver is money, but it's also consumed in massive quantities by industry. Solar panels need silver, electronics need silver, batteries need silver, medical devices need silver, water purification needs silver, 5G infrastructure needs silver, AI data centers need silver, the list goes on. And here's the key point. While the system tries to suppress price through paper derivatives, The real world consumes silver every single day. Physical inventories disappear into end-use applications. A solar panel gets installed. That silver is gone. It's not coming back. An iPhone gets manufactured. That silver is gone. The industrial consumption creates a one-way flow out of above-ground stocks and into irreversible uses. Let me give you specific numbers on industrial consumption because this is critical to understanding why silver is different from gold. Solar panel manufacturing consumes roughly 130 million ounces of silver per year. Each panel uses about 20 grams. And solar installation is accelerating globally. China alone is installing hundreds of gigawatts of solar capacity annually. India, the US, Europe, all ramping up. By 2030, solar could consume 300 million ounces per year. That's over a third of total mine production going into one application. Electronics consume another 250 million ounces annually. Every smartphone, every laptop, every television, every appliance uses silver. It's the best conductor of electricity. You can't substitute copper or aluminum in high-performance applications without losing functionality. So as technology advances, as devices get more sophisticated, silver content per device might even increase. Electric vehicles use about 30 grams of silver per vehicle. Multiply that by projected EV sales of 30 million units annually by 2030, and you're looking at another 30 million ounces per year. Medical devices, because silver is antibacterial, consume millions of ounces. Water purification systems use silver. Photography still uses some silver. Jewelry and silverware consume silver. Batteries, particularly silver-zinc batteries for specialized applications, consume silver. Add it all up, and you're looking at total industrial demand around 800 million ounces per year. Mine production is 835 million, so industrial demand alone absorbs nearly all of mine supply. That leaves almost nothing for investment demand, for monetary demand, for strategic accumulation. Any significant investment buying creates a deficit, and we've been in deficit for 5 consecutive years. Inventories have been drawn down. That's why comex stocks are at multi-year lows. That's why Shanghai vaults are nearly empty. That's why premiums exist between physical and paper. That's why Bateman talks about pulling silver back into the physical market after more than a century of structural suppression. For 100 years, since the demonetization of silver in most countries, silver has traded primarily as an industrial commodity. Its monetary role was suppressed. Price was controlled through paper markets, and most people forgot that silver was money for 5,000 years before it was an industrial metal. What Bateman and others like him are doing is recognizing that silver's monetary role is coming back, not because of some economic theory, but because the current monetary system is failing. And when fiat currencies lose credibility, people return to what worked for millennia: gold and silver. What about other assets? This part makes people uncomfortable, but here it is. Stocks, bonds, real estate, and crypto, they all have one thing in common. They all depend on a system, on contracts, on intermediaries. Stocks represent ownership in companies, but that ownership is mediated through brokerages, through exchanges, through legal structures. During the Great Depression, during market crashes, during financial crises, access to stocks has been restricted. Trading has been halted. Prices have been manipulated. And in extreme cases, ownership has been redefined. Bonds are promises to pay. Government bonds are backed by the taxing authority of the state. Corporate bonds are backed by the company's ability to generate cash flow, but both require the issuer to honor the obligation, and history is full of defaults, restructurings, currency redenominations that wiped out bondholders. When Argentina defaults, when Russia defaults, when any sovereign or corporation defaults, bondholders get pennies on the dollar or nothing. Real estate seems tangible. You can see it, touch it, use it, but real estate depends on property rights, which are ultimately enforced by governments. And governments can tax, regulate, confiscate, or redefine property rights when they need to. Property taxes can rise. Zoning can change. Eminent domain can take your land. And in hyperinflationary environments, real estate becomes illiquid because transactions collapse when currency is unstable. Crypto, specifically, Bateman calls a psychological operation. Not because the technology isn't real, but because in moments of systemic stress, it doesn't provide physical shelter or true sovereignty. Crypto depends on internet, on electricity, on exchanges, on the ability to transact. If the power grid goes down, if the internet is restricted, if exchanges are shut, your crypto is inaccessible. You can't hold it. You can't physically possess it. You can't trade it in a peer-to-peer way like you can with gold and silver. I'm not saying crypto has no value. I'm saying it's not the same as physical metal. Crypto might survive the system. It might thrive in a new digital economy, but it's not a substitute for physical sovereignty. And in Bateman's view, and I tend to agree, when the music stops, there aren't enough chairs. Not everyone can exit the financial system. Not everyone can convert promises into real assets. The system doesn't have the capacity, and those who wait too long will be stuck holding worthless paper. The banking system and the real risk. The modern banking system is designed to save itself. When something breaks, accounts get frozen. Remember Cyprus in 2013? Bank depositors had their accounts frozen overnight. Then the government announced that deposits over 100,000 euros would be confiscated to recapitalize the banks. People who had savings in Cypriot banks lost 47% of their deposits above that threshold. That wasn't a theory. That wasn't a conspiracy. That happened to real people with real money. And Cyprus wasn't unique. It was just explicit. During the financial crisis of 2008, accounts were restricted, withdrawals were limited. In Greece, during their crisis, capital controls were imposed. You couldn't take more than 60 euros per day from an ATM. Your money was trapped. In Argentina, during their various crises, bank accounts were frozen, converted from dollars to pesos at unfavorable rates, and the peso then collapsed. People lost their life savings. That's called a bail-in. The term is now official policy in many jurisdictions. In the U.S., the Dodd-Frank Act includes provisions for bail-ins. In Europe, the Bank Recovery and Resolution Directive does the same. The playbook is established. When banks fail, depositors above insured limits can have their funds converted to bank equity or confiscated to stabilize the institution. It's legal. It's planned. It's waiting to be used. Assets get taxed. When governments face fiscal stress, they raise taxes. Sometimes they do it slowly, sometimes suddenly. In France in 2013, the top marginal income tax rate briefly hit 75%. In the U.S. during World War II, top rates exceeded 90%. Capital gains taxes, estate taxes, wealth taxes, they all get raised when governments need revenue. And if you make a fortune in financial assets during a crisis, that profit is a target. It's visible. It's easy to tax. Governments will take a large portion through windfall profit taxes or special levies. Rules get rewritten. Contract law, property rights, financial regulations, they all change when the system is under stress. In 1933, Executive Order 6102 in the United States made private gold ownership illegal. Citizens were required to turn in their gold to the government at a fixed price. Those who didn't comply faced 10 years in prison and fines. The gold was confiscated, revalued higher, and used to recapitalize the Federal Reserve. That happened in America, the land of property rights, during peacetime. What was legal becomes illegal. What was protected becomes confiscatable. It has happened before, and it will happen again. If the system faces existential stress, if banks are failing, if currency is collapsing, governments will do whatever necessary to maintain control, and that includes restricting, taxing, or confiscating private wealth. With physical metals, zero counterparty risk. No one can freeze your gold if it's in your possession. No permission required. You don't need approval to buy, to hold, to sell, to transport physical metal. No dilution. Governments can print currency. They can issue more bonds, more stocks, but they can't create more gold or silver. The supply is fixed by geology and mining capacity. No, trust me, when you hold the physical metal, you're not trusting anyone. You have the asset. That's final settlement. This is what Bateman understands. This is what the smart money understands. Physical precious metals are the only financial asset that's also a physical asset with no counterparty. Everything else requires someone else to make good on a promise. And in a systemic crisis, promises break. Final thought. What this purchase really means, when someone like David Bateman buys 14.8 million ounces, he's not saying silver will go up tomorrow. He's saying, I don't trust the system from here. And that's a much more powerful message. Because Bateman isn't a retail investor gambling on a price move. He's a sophisticated allocator with access to institutional resources, top advisors, and deep market knowledge. And he's choosing to convert $1 billion of financial wealth into physical metal. That decision sends a signal. It says the risk-reward of holding fiat currency and financial assets is worse than the risk-reward of holding metal that pays no yield, that requires storage, that requires security. Think about what that means. In a normal functioning system, holding cash or bonds earning 4 or 5% should be preferable to holding metal earning 0. But Bateman and others like him are saying the system isn't normal. The risk of holding paper is greater than the opportunity cost of holding metal. And here's why this matters to you. You might not have $1 billion. You might not be able to buy 15 million ounces. But the logic applies at every scale. If the system is fragile, if fiat currencies are at risk, if financial promises might not be kept, then having some portion of your wealth in physical metal makes sense. Not all of it, but some meaningful percentage that would preserve purchasing power if the worst-case scenarios play out. So what's the practical takeaway? What should you do with this information? First, understand that Bateman's move is a warning signal. He's not buying silver because he thinks it will go up 10%. He's buying because he thinks the system might break, and he wants to be positioned on the other side of that break. That's a very different thesis than trading or speculation. Second, consider your own exposure to system risk. How much of your wealth is in banks, in brokerage accounts, in paper assets that depend on intermediaries? If something breaks, if accounts get frozen, if trading gets halted, how much of your wealth is inaccessible? Most people have all their wealth in the system. That's maximum exposure to systemic risk. Third, think about diversification differently. Traditional diversification is stocks, bonds, real estate. That's diversification within the system. But it's not diversification away from system risk. All those assets depend on the system functioning. Real diversification includes assets outside the system. Physical metals, for example, they're no one's liability. They don't depend on banks or governments or legal frameworks beyond basic property rights. Fourth, start small if you're new to this. You don't need to convert your entire portfolio. Start with 5%, maybe 10%. Whatever you can afford to hold without needing to sell if prices fluctuate. Because physical metal isn't for trading. It's insurance. You hold it hoping you never need it. But if you do need it, it could be priceless. Fifth, focus on physical, not paper. This is critical. ETFs like SLV or paper silver certificates aren't the same as holding the metal. They have counterparty risk. They can suspend redemptions. They can settle in cash. During a crisis, paper promises break. Physical doesn't. If you want the protection Bateman is getting, you need physical metal in your possession or in allocated storage where you have direct title. And sixth, understand this is a long-term position. Bateman isn't buying to sell in 6 months. He's buying for the next decade, for the next monetary reset, for the next system. If you're thinking short-term, if you need liquidity, physical metal might not be right for you. But if you're thinking about preserving wealth through systemic change, it's one of the few assets that survived every crisis in human history. I want to be clear. I'm not predicting collapse tomorrow. I'm not saying the dollar goes to 0 next month. I'm saying the structural imbalances, the debt levels, the monetary dynamics, they all point toward increasing instability. And in that environment, insurance makes sense. Physical metal is insurance. It's insurance against monetary mismanagement, against financial system failure, against geopolitical chaos, against loss of purchasing power. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think of this purchase? Do you see it as conviction or excess? Do you believe the system can survive another full cycle? Drop your comment. I read them all. If this video helped you, like it, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel. I'll keep bringing you real signals, not headlines. This is Ken AG. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next update.